Thank you all for attending. I think this is an important discussion to have, no matter who the stakeholder is. It doesn't have to be me, but it has to be a part of a national discussion. It is anyway, whether we like it or not. And I think to present what immigrants are doing to positively affect our community and the country, and what effect they have on the economy and on taxes and on employment are good things to talk about, but not the only thing. What I'd like to talk to you about today is a bit about the mission statement for lifeundocumented.org. And it's not to sell the website, it's simply to make people aware of what I'd like to do, because I certainly can't do it alone. But let's start with a video. I'm humbled by the introduction. As I was standing there halfway through, I thought, well, that must be about someone else, right? And so it felt very odd to hear those things. And that's actually part of, I won't go into it, but part of what we ever heard of called imposter syndrome. So it affects different communities, definitely immigrants. And so I still feel that and live with that. Like that's someone else that they're talking about, not really me. Do I deserve to have those things said about me? It's an odd feeling. But let's begin with a brief documentary that I helped make with some great friends who happen to be filmmakers. This is all self-funded, by the way, so no one's had any influence on this except me, for better or worse. I ran across the US-Mexican border in 1981 when I was 7 years old. I did not think at all I was doing anything wrong, that I was committing a crime, or that I was a criminal. I was running for my life.
The United States, a nation of an estimated 325 million people according to the latest U.S. Census, has more immigrants than any other country in the world. According to the Pew Research Center, there are an estimated 45 million immigrants in the U.S. About 11 million of these are undocumented.
I ran across the border for about 12 hours overnight. And it was me and a coyote, the guide, the smuggler. My mom and my brother ran 24 hours prior. There were surveillance helicopters with lights about 10 or 20 feet away from us at times. So we had to sit very still until the helicopter passed, and then we would immediately start running again. I was giving it my all at that age. I just thought, if I don't do this, I just pause and die here, wherever that was.
The Pew Research Center has found a decrease in the undocumented population from its peak of 12 million in 2007. The major regions of origin of undocumented immigrants are Mexico and Central America with 71%, and Asia with 13%.
So my mother was a teacher in El Salvador in 1981. This was during the Salvadoran Civil War. She was working on equal pay and equal rights for female teachers. The government didn't like that type of work. And so she received death threats at her school. And she was told that if she didn't leave the country, they would kill her and her 2 sons. She wanted to stay in El Salvador. But in fact, teachers were showing up dead all over the place. So she had 2 choices, either stay and risk being killed and her 2 sons being killed, or leave El Salvador and come to the US.
Recent arrivals represent a smaller share of all undocumented immigrants, as over 66% have been in the U.S. for more than 10 years. And according to the Migration Policy Institute, over half are at 150% to over 200% above the poverty level.
Often the media uses dehumanizing terms to describe undocumented immigrants. Terms like criminals, rapists, murderers, other terms like invasion and infestation, when in fact, the data shows a completely different story about undocumented immigrants. Let's take crime, for example. A recently published study looked at undocumented immigration and violent crime, and it concluded that there is no correlation or association between undocumented immigrants and violent crime. Another study from the Cato Institute looked at incarceration rates, and they showed that native-born Americans had an over 3-fold higher incarceration rate compared to undocumented immigrants. So you see that the data directly speaks to the misperception in the public about undocumented immigrants and crime. Let's talk about taxes. Data shows that the majority of undocumented immigrants are both employed and file taxes. This goes against the public perception that undocumented immigrants are often not employed and do not file their taxes.
Undocumented immigrants contribute significantly to state and local taxes, collectively paying an estimated $12 billion a year.
Undocumented immigrants are not eligible for social benefits, so they pay into a tax system from which they can never gain social benefits. There's a need for longitudinal data to look at this in the long run, to examine the association between undocumented immigrants' employment and tax filing.
In 1986, as part of the Immigration Reform and Control Act signed by President Reagan, around half of the undocumented immigrants were allowed to apply for a pathway to citizenship.
This administration asked the Congress to pass a comprehensive legislative package including employer sanctions, other measures to increase enforcement of the immigration laws, and legalization. The Act provides these three essential components.
Because we arrived in the United States before 1982, we were blessed and eligible to apply for the 1986 Immigration Reform Act, otherwise known as amnesty. The only one since then. My mom had to show that she was employed, she went through a full background check, so a fully vetted process.
Our objective is only to establish a reasonable, fair, orderly, and secure system of immigration into this country, and not to discriminate in any way against particular nations or people.
We were able to stay here because of that amnesty and really take full advantage of all the opportunities in the U.S., including going through the educational system. Today, I'm a physician, not a criminal or rapist or a murderer. So there's a lot of misinformation being disseminated about undocumented immigrants. The current rhetoric is emotional and based on stereotypes. What I don't see is rhetoric that is data-based. Because there's a need for longitudinal data on undocumented immigrants, we've started this initiative at lifeundocumented.org. Its remit is to collect undocumented immigrant stories and data and to disseminate these to change and balance out the media rhetoric on undocumented immigrants and to effect better policy making and policy decisions that are based on data and longitudinal data, not on fear and stereotypes. We are looking forward to partnering with others, and we hope that they will join our initiative at lifeundocumented.org. Together, we can build an immigration process and a pathway to citizenship that is humane, holistic, and globally responsive.
To learn more and get involved, visit lifeundocumented.org.
So how many of you are, just a couple of quick questions, I'd like to interact, and this is not going to be a lecture from me to you one way, but how many of you are from El Salvador or have family that's from? All right, great. So I don't know if you noticed in my logo, did you see them, it was very fast, did you see the inside of the logo? It's the 5 volcanoes from El Salvador, so anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. I think what's important is to start talking about this data, right? And one thing I wanted to point out is that the data that's currently out there is based on the U.S. Census from 2010, if I'm not wrong. And the estimated population in the United States is about 325 million. And that's also guesstimated because the last census was 315. And so the reason I'm going into these details is because when you look at and hear about this data, you have to keep in mind that this is not real data. This is estimated data. So they look in the U.S. Census and they say, as an example, I don't know why I think of dinosaurs. I usually think of food, by the way, as you can see from my documentary. And apparently this is my favorite shirt. I forgot I was wearing that there too. It's kind of fun. All right, so if you look at a dinosaur track, right, and maybe I think T-Rex was a vegetarian. And so there's vegetables drawn from high treetops, and there's an eggshell that's broken with nothing in it. Then you'll say, I think a T-Rex was here. So that's what the U.S. Census does for undocumented immigrants. They look at taxes, unemployment. So they're not looking directly at any individuals or households. They're looking at associated characteristics of what they think the U.S. Census Bureau, an undocumented immigrant, quote unquote, looks like in terms of their finances, their crime rate, their employment, what areas they're employed in, and then they assume that those are the undocumented immigrants within the U.S. Census that actually filled out the U.S. Census. So that's the estimated 11 million that you'll hear about in the media, including here. That's where that number comes from. What I'd like to collect is real data. And how do you do that? You're asking, well, I'm not going to speak to 11 million immigrants, so you don't have to. So the U.S. Census surveys about 60,000 households. And SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, they do this every year. They interview about 60,000 households, you know, including me. We all love the word free, right? Whether it's free food or I'm staying at the Westin in the city and I have a $35 food credit. But I paid $28 for the $35 food credit. But nonetheless, it got me really excited because it's free. It's like $7 at 3. So SAMHSA pays people $30 to fill out the survey. And that's how you do it. They sit one-on-one and they interview people for 45 minutes straight. And that's how I plan to collect data. Can I do this alone? Absolutely not. How many people do I need to talk to? About 3,000 need to talk to a statistician. So not only do I want to collect these stories, because I don't want you to think I'm all about data that's faceless. Obviously my documentary doesn't show that. It's the human face to these undocumented immigrant stories, right? That the 11 million is not a lottery number. These are actual lives that are impacted, whether they're in TPS, temporary protected status, DACA, or they're undocumented with a cliff every day that they fall off of and they maybe get deported by ICE. So these are actual human lives. But if you speak to only the story, and that alone, that will convince no one, or maybe a few people. So we need to add data to this, to having a discussion about what policy for undocumented immigrants needs to occur and needs to be put in place. So we keep repeating things about all the crime that undocumented immigrants cause, then let's actually look at the actual crime. So the stat that I show is all that we have now, which is estimated and associated crime of what they think an undocumented immigrant looks like in a U.S. Census. These are all guesstimates, guys. So that's why I wanted to start this initiative. I already have by starting to collect stories. From those stories, then I want to extract all of this data, right? No name, no social security, no date of birth. You de-identify. The U.S. Census does this, SAMHSA does this, and other organizations do this. Any drug abuse organization, any sensitive topic, they all do this. So, you know, what I want to drive across is that we need to start having a discussion that's data-based. It's not going to convince everyone. That's okay. But we want to get people to the table unemotionally, right? No emotions and no anger. Let's talk about what the data actually shows, and let's be fair about immigration policy. That's at the very least. What I'd like it to be is kind and loving. That's the right approach, but not everyone will agree with that. And I'd like to engage as many people as possible moving forward. So I'll stop there because I can go on for about an hour. But Tom, I don't know if I should go into Q&A or whatever.
Let's do it afterwards. Let's let the students go, okay. And I'll have questions for all of you.
All right, great.
And I am a DACA recipient, so everything that was just talked about, I'm also from El Salvador, so I relate a lot to that undocumented story. And myself, along with these wonderful students here, have founded and developed the Undocumented Student Alliance, which is a club here on campus that is focused on honoring, empowering, and advocating for undocumented students. It was created by undocumented students for that population here on campus because there wasn't really an outlet or an organization that was looking out for the interests of undocumented students on campus, despite the fact that there are many of them. And there are many different obstacles that they have to face on a daily basis. And there was no one to turn to, no one to get information from, no one to just seek advice and help from. And so really the founding of this club was to support and advocate for all those students on campus. And so I'll let the rest of the people introduce themselves. Hi everyone. I don't know if I can move this closer. So yeah, we are so thankful to Dr. Delgides for having us here today and extending that opportunity so we can speak to all of you. I think what was really important and why we really wanted to do this was because you can see all the statistics, you can see all of the stories, but it's different to actually see us here and understand that, you know, undocumented immigrants are people that are far from you, or people that are myths. They could be your classmates, they could be your neighbors. So it is a hard thing to do, and to stand up here and talk to all of you, because of course it is a tense subject, but that's why we want to kind of break that and be able to show you all that, you know, it's actually a very human, real story. So we'll start with introducing our position. So I'm the president of the 2018-2019 board.
Hi everyone, I'm Priscilla Ortega and I'm the vice president of the 2018-2019 board. Also, I will talk about how this club was, how it has meant to me. So basically for me, it was like a support group because myself, I'm a DACA student. So a lot of the times going to higher education, just entering itself was so hard because you didn't really have anyone else to look at and who was able to help you, and how were you going to pay your tuition because you don't get any financial aid. So then you're working 3 jobs every summer and you're working while you're studying, and you have to do everything that every other student does, but you have to do it 10 times better because you also can't pay your tuition and you're undocumented. With that, this club has been the foundation for who I am, because a lot of the times you hear the top topics, because I'm a PL student, so we hear about the illegal aliens, which is very dehumanizing, but you have to sit there and act like everything's okay and that didn't hurt you inside. So when you go to this club, you sit there and you realize that there's people out there that are just like you and that are able to make it out there. So I felt that this was an exemplary club for everyone else on campus, if they're undocumented or not, because it's a support group to help others achieve their goals and dreams.
I'm Corinne Herrera and I'm the PR, and I allied myself with this group because it is a very important topic, and I feel like it affects many people in my life, and not only in my life but like around me, and you know, you don't realize it unless you actually ask and like become part of the world. So
my name is Jaden Matera. I'm the event coordinator for the Undocumented Student Alliance. When I came into college, I didn't really know there was a club that advocated for undocumented immigrants. I came blinded, and once I was introduced to this club, I immediately fell in love with the club because what they do is immense. They advocate. We also have a bunch of programs that show advocacy, and we're just activists, and I enjoy all of my board members because each of us bring a different perspective to the issues that are going on. And like my board said, we kind of wanted to bring, it was kind of like a safe haven. We don't judge anybody. If we don't force anybody to share their stories, it's kind of a conversational tone within all of us, and we are all unified, and we want student Westbury to be unified, and we want to bring awareness on the situations that arise in the society.
And we'll ask this about all of us. Is there questions that they want to?
So we wanted to talk a little bit about our personal stories, just so that you could also get a feel of why we are linked to this club, because I think it's important to talk about that. So I actually came to this country when I was 3 years old. So I was born in Colombia in 1998, in a time where there was just, so the things that you see on Netflix, on Narcos, the things that you see that are very may seem very funny because they're far, are actually the things that I was born into. So that was my reality when I walked out the door. So it was very hard. So obviously the chance of survival at a time like that was very low. So my mother chose to come to the United States with me. We tried everything we could to do this the legal way and to get here in a way that we wouldn't obviously have to live the life we've now had to live. But you know, there's a lot of misconception, and this actually, you stand in a line that has no end because you don't know how long you have to wait until you're actually given that visa, that entry into the US. So what she chose to do, and what I think a lot of mothers would do for their children, is to risk, you know, your own life so that your child will have a chance at a future. So I crossed the border with my mother when I was 3 years old, and obviously it took a while because when you're with a 3-year-old you have to take extra precautions. But once we came here, really the most important thing that I want to say with this story is that the little girls that you see on the news that are being tear gassed and all those things that you're seeing, that could have been me, and it wasn't, thank God. But that child is not a threat. So that child, and I'm telling you because I was that child is not here to do harm or to hurt anybody. We're just here for a better life. And I think anybody in this room would do that for their family members.
With what Manila said, we all have very emotional, and we thank everyone for their bravery and able to share their story like that. So from that, I'll go into my story. I immigrated to the United States at the age of 6. My parents had already been here because they left me with my grandmother because they could not afford a life in Ecuador. I was born in Ecuador in 1998. So they had left me with my grandmother, and they had come in through the process illegally. The reason why is because they were poor. They wouldn't be able to get a visa. Let's be realistic. If you don't have money, you're not going to be able to get a visa. So by that time that they would have to wait, the survival rate would probably be unlikely because there is no money, and how are you going to feed a family of 3? So with that, they were already here in the United States, and then because of the lack of, they didn't have their little girl with them, so they tried every possible way. They looked into visas. They couldn't get me a visa. So the last resort was smuggling me into the country with peyote. At the age of 6, my godmother, my grandma, sent me to Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador, and from there I started my adventure into the United States. So from then on, I met a fake family, which was my family that I was traveling to. I was Mexican, because if you say you're Ecuadorian, you're going to be sent back to Ecuador. So if ICE was to catch me, I would be sent back to Mexico. I had this identity at 6. I had to memorize all these things, and I had no idea what was going on, but at the same time, I realized that I was not like everyone else. So at the age of 6, I got to Mexico, and from there on, I had to memorize Mexican terminology and that you were Mexican basically at the age of 6. So from then on, I crossed the Rio Grande, and then I got to Texas. With like his story, I had to run and we had to be cautious. There was the fear of drowning, and there was all these things. But I crossed to Texas, and then from there, I was put in a room with probably 50 other people. A 6-year-old was with all these grown-ups. Nothing happened to me, thankfully, but like any other little girl crossing by themselves, anything could have happened to me. From there on, it was a lot of people in one room until they decided that I could leave Texas. From there on, they transitioned me to another location. From then, they put me into a van for 3 days. I survived with coffee and chips until I got to the city, New York City, where I saw my parents after a few years. And I did not recognize who these people were. I just saw a similar looking face, my mother, because she was the last person who left. And then that's how I was reunited with my parents. If you'd ask my parents if they would put me through this path, they'd probably tell you no. because it's a scary and it's a long path, and there's so many struggles that you go through. From that, although my story of getting here sounds so difficult, I feel that the most difficult part was getting here to the United States and feeling that no one accepts you. And that although you try so hard and you do everything right, because to have DACA you have to fulfill all these requirements, you are still looked as the criminal and a rapist and all the things going wrong in the United States. So from then on, it became harder with the election and everything like that, and people looking down on you and just trying to like stay strong for everyone else, because if you crack down and you've already put your identity and your status out there, what is there for the other people that aren't able to come out of the shadows? Because at the end, we live in the shadows and we try to do everything correctly, but we still are in the shadows.
Well, my story is a little different because my parents came over on a visa when I was 3 years old. So in 1997, the year I was born in El Salvador, at the time it was the murder capital of the world. So you can imagine that the violence from wars and gangs was just unimaginable and not a place where a family could survive. And I like to tell the story of my first birthday party here in the United States. I was 4 years old and it was at Chuck E. Cheese. And it was really nice. I got my tokens and my crown. And the reason that that moment is so important to me and to my family is because that's the reason they came. That's the reason that they left everything that they knew. Their family, their careers, their culture, their country, was for me to be able to celebrate another year, another birthday. And so that fourth birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese was really the first moment that my family was able to rest easy. They didn't have to worry about their child being kidnapped, or my father being murdered, or my mother being assaulted. Although life here in the United States wasn't going to be easy, and they knew they would face discrimination. They knew it would be hard to find jobs. They knew they wouldn't have access to health care, and they wouldn't have access to an education. They willingly left all of that behind to make sure that their daughter could survive. And that's what I work towards every single day. So when I had the opportunity, because of DACA, which is Deferred Action for Child Arrivals, which gives me that deferred action from deportation, it gave me the ability to apply and to come to SUNY Old Westbury, give me the chance to have a job, get a license. There's so many little things that people take advantage of and you don't know. In high school, wasn't able to register to vote. I wasn't really able to have a driver's permit until DACA came out. And then I was able to drive, and then I was able to have a job. And so the importance of our stories and of this club is to, as I said before, advocate, honor, and empower all the different stories, because there's not just one mold that fits an undocumented person. And right now we're focusing on Central America. There are thousands of undocumented immigrants from all parts of the world, not just the Mexicans, not just Central America. And it's important to remember that there are different struggles for Black undocumented immigrants than there are for brown undocumented immigrants. There are so many different intersections to identity that come into play, and you have to take it upon yourself to want to learn and put yourself in the shoes of an undocumented person. Because if you're not actively seeking information, actively seeking to broaden your knowledge, then you're just going to be stuck in that same place. And as these girls have reiterated before us, they're not criminals. They're not coming in to steal jobs and take your spots. It's not what's happening. But families cross that border, sometimes not even for a better life, just for the simple fact that they want to survive. And I feel like that's a pretty reasonable reason to cross, you know, kind of like to work. So here we are, and that's why we're here.
I also know that, so for Corinne and Jalen, they may not be undocumented themselves, but they have decided to join this movement because they have, and just like all of you, I'm sure, have been at one point affected by this issue, have seen it through whether it's their neighbors, their family members. So would you guys like to speak a little bit about that? And then we're going to talk a little bit just before we end about this topic, what you're going to be seeing in the next couple of days, because the Migrant Caravan, that's not a new thing. I know that it seems like this alarm, and the media likes to portray it as this super alarming thing, but people have been crossing and fleeing from their countries for years. And so we are those stories, and although we were lucky enough to make it, those people haven't, so we really want to honor that. Do you want to start?
So I didn't know much about DACA when I was in high school. I actually didn't know much about undocumented immigration at all until I was about maybe 17 years old, because I had a coworker who was a DACA recipient, and I specifically remember when she had to go through the reapplication process. And I still didn't even know because I didn't ask questions. But, you know, then I came to Westbury, and my roommate was undocumented, and, you know, within those conversations that I had with her, like, I became more, like, you know, educated on the topic, and I started to realize, like, wow, like, I really am privileged just because I was born here. And, you know, it's unfair that people are held accountable just because of where they were born, and just because, you know, their parents decided to make a decision that would, you know, better their life and better their child's life. And I always like to think back to, you know, my grandma, because she's the one who was born in Colombia, she's the one who made that leap. And she's the reason why my mom was able to get her degrees, and the reason why I'm here today. And it's important to just take a minute and realize that not everything is great. Not everything is, you know, perfect just because of how you see it. Like, just because you're living, you know, your life, and just because you may seem like, you may think that you have certain obstacles in your way, you may have those obstacles, but like, there are other people who are really going through it. And, you know, it was tough to be here that freshman year when the election was happening, and just to see the fear in the faces of my peers, because I couldn't do anything to help them, because I was able to go vote. I was able to even register to vote. You know, these basic things that I am privileged enough to be able to do that they couldn't do. You know, they're afraid for their life, and they don't even have a voice to fight for themselves. So, seeing all of that, it definitely affects you, and it definitely, you know, makes you want to advocate and become an activist, and to, you know, fight for the rights of people who don't have a voice.
Hello everybody, my name is Jay Matera. I was born in the United States, however my father is an undocumented immigrant. So my childhood was very rough in the fact that my father got deported back to the Dominican Republic. When that occurred, I was depressed. That was my father figure. He was a role model to me, and the fact that I couldn't see him anymore just destroyed me inside. When that occurred, well, to begin with, my father is the most amazing person. He is very energetic. In the mornings, at like 6 a.m., he'll wake up, play a salsa song, wake up the whole house. You know, that just energetic how we're going through this process of deportation. I was told that he was kind of accused for like a crime that he did not commit. And this stems from the fact that the stereotype that kind of Dominicans kind of look alike because we have the same skin complexion or we come from the same face. So when they were saying that, they were kind of dehumanizing my father, saying he was a criminal, a thief, rapist, like that was being said. And me, I didn't know what to believe. I was very young at that age, so I was definitely confused coming into this process. This was my first my first interaction with deportation, immigration, etc., etc. So my father got deported, and he was destroyed himself. I remember he was crying because he didn't want to leave me and my brother, my older brother, because we were all he had, basically. The main reason he left the Dominican Republic was because of poverty. There's immense poverty in the Dominican Republic. He left because of poverty. There's also a huge amounts of violence, lack of resources. These are the reasons undocumented immigrants want to migrate into the United States, because they go through these things and nobody really understands that, which is why I personally find it kind of ridiculous how people spin these stories and say, oh, they're lying, oh, they don't know the struggles we have in the United States. And these kind of get me angry because nobody can kind of relate to what undocumented immigrants go through unless it is an undocumented immigrant. We all have different stories. So the fact that people don't really take these stories into consideration bothers me. However, we're all human and everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I myself, ever since my father was deported, I dedicated myself to fight for immigration rights. So, as you can see, with these amazing girls in the Undocumented Student Alliance, and we do immense work. We just want to spread the word around that undocumented immigrants are not to steal people's jobs or to kill anybody. We're people, just like everybody else, and we just want to have everybody unified. We just want a community where everybody respects everybody, no matter their status. We're all human beings, and we all deserve a chance to prosper in the United States.
Thank you, everybody. I don't want to take up too much more time because I think we have kind of reached the cap. But if anybody has any questions, we meet Mondays during Common Hour at NAB 1113, and so we're definitely always available. We have flyers around campus, and I know it is a very hard topic and something that if you are undocumented and you are not out of in the light with that, it is hard and it is scary, but it's time to, spread your voice and to share your story, because if you don't do it now, then you're always going to live under the shadows in fear. So thank you all for listening to us, and yeah, thank you, Dr. Dilgidis, for having us.
You can take questions for any of the students or from Mario. If there are any questions, please.
Yeah.
So you guys say that, I heard you guys say a couple times, you guys are not here to kill people or to steal jobs, but essentially, you guys are going to be taking, I'm just saying, essentially you guys are here for jobs, when you come for jobs, so I'm just trying to say, I just feel like there's a rebuttal in that, because when you say that you're not here for jobs, I feel like that's actually the opposite. So when you guys say that, I kind of can't get behind that, because that's essentially what people are coming here for, is for a job.
So can I ask you a question? Where do you work?
I work for Winthrop Hospital.
Oh, hospital.
Yeah.
Okay. So that takes, I'm assuming, a degree since you're here.
No, actually no, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, so what are the requirements for that job?
I think I just have to have a high school diploma.
High school diploma. Okay. So I see where you're coming from and where you're stating, but if my parents, for example, are crossing the border to come here, they're not going to take your job at a hospital. How? They come here to take, quote unquote, jobs that citizens aren't doing. You're not going to be out in farms and fields growing crops, are you? Are you cleaning houses? There are so many jobs, the nail technicians, the babysitters, the cleaners, that is founded and fueled by undocumented immigrants, because that labor isn't coming from citizens. It's just not. And so, like I said, I understand where your question is coming from, but it's a false equivalency, because undocumented immigrants aren't coming here to work at hospitals or jobs that citizens are more inclined to take. The majority of undocumented immigrants have to do the grunt work that is in the United States. And so it's just not, like I said, it's more of a false equivalency. They're not taking your jobs. And furthermore, if they were by chance to take your job, it's not them who's taking your job. It's the employer who's exploiting their labor for cheaper outcomes. If there is an employer here in the United States that is employing an undocumented immigrant to treat them worse and to pay them less, it's because they chose to give that job. So, just two fronts, I feel like it's very much not what's happening.
I appreciate that response. Also, I wanted to say also, as far as coming over here like illegally, do you think that's fair? Do you think that's fair? And if not, what would you do to change it? Like, do you think it's fair that for people, no matter what the reason is, for them to come over here illegally and then to, you know, say that that's fair, that they can just do that? Like, you can't just go over to Canada and just say, yo, like, let us in, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, and they're killing black people over here. They're killing young black innocent people, but we're not going over to Canada saying, you know, we have a problem here, let us in. So that's what, like, it's kind of like.
Well, to be fair, if you wanted to go to Canada, I'm pretty sure you could.
I could.
In theory, there's not really much that's stopping you. The thing about being a United States citizen is you really have the opportunity to go wherever you want. Other countries aren't really stopping you from coming in.
Yeah, but the fight is right now is like, do you think it's fair because of our current immigration policies, like you mentioned before, do you think it's fair for anybody, no matter what the reason, from any country in this world, to come over here illegally, period?
Yeah. Unless there's a legal groundwork where people could come in and we can provide that pathway for that legal option, that it's just not there. The idea that people are coming in just because they want to, it's, again, I feel like just it's a misconception. If my parents had the option to come here legally, I doubt that they would put up with they wouldn't be putting up with the way that they're treated in this country if they had that option to come here legally. Nobody wants to come here undocumented. Nobody wants to have to fight for their lives on the daily. Nobody wants to leave their whole entire life behind. It's not out of wanting. It's out of need and necessity. So if my parents crossing the border so that I could live is justified as fair, then yeah, I think it's fair.
Can I throw in a point here? In the next session, we're going to have a conversation about the history of U.S. policy towards many of these countries. And what we might see is that U.S. policy has been very extractive towards these other countries and repressive towards these other countries. And in fact has deteriorated some of the civil institutions that lead to people fleeing those countries. So part of the story is the history of our relationship to their countries, not just them coming to us, but how we've treated them, and that this is a consequence of that. Maybe we have to take responsibility for that. But that's a story, that's a history, that's the next session.
And if I could add to that, so nicely said and more points. So I actually really appreciate the questions. They're valid concerns. And I think this is the type of discussion that needs to occur. So to add some data, okay, instead of false imaginings. So when I say data, again, keep in mind what I said before, this is based on the census, right? So we need to collect real data, one-on-one, one undocumented immigrant at a time, whether in TPS DACA, which by the way is about 10% of the 11 million. So DACA is around 800,000. TPS is about 300,000, that's 1.1, and there's an estimated 11 million. And so there's another part of the conversation we're not having, in the media at least. So to answer your question, low-level, low-skilled jobs, long-term, are not affected by undocumented immigrant migration. In the immediate term, you do see a decrease in those low-skilled jobs, but in the long term, there isn't. But that's exactly why we need to collect this data and to see. Again, this is all estimates from the U.S. Census, and there's a need for that. The other thing is the destabilization of that region from intervention by the U.S. government. So to add to those stories, a little bit more detail. In our case, my mom did not at all want to come here. She was a professor in El Salvador since she was 18. But she was working on, does anyone know what the TIAA is? It's like a teachers union, basically. So the Salvadoran government said that she was a communist for working on equal pay and equal rights for female teachers. That's exactly what she was working on. and she was a leader in that space. They called her to school and told her they're going to kill her. So the folks that supplied the guns to the U.S. government to fight her, who do you think that was? So that was the United States. So they sold those guns to fight communism. They destabilized the region and then left. So it's no one to fault. It's just these are historical facts. These are a small part that I'm giving you. And I think your point is valid. You're saying, well, what gives folks the right to just come through here? Remember, in my case and the folks here too, they've been vetted actually through DACA. DACA is a process that doesn't just give you a number and say come right in. They do an extensive background check. They did that in 1981 for us and my family. So my mom had to have a job, no criminal record, no evidence of any wrongdoing while we were here undocumented from 81 to 87. And by the way, there has not been any more Immigration and Reform Act since 1986 or 87, depending on the source that you look at. And immigration acts have been around since about 1850. And to Professor Tom, I don't want to mess up your last name, point, if you look, and you can just Google this, it's pretty easy, from 1850 till now, and you look at the preference for certain racial and ethnic groups, or the converse, who immigration acts tried to stop from coming in, it's never Anglo-Saxon groups. That's just a fact. It's other groups, Chinese immigrants in 1870, I believe. And then one more point I wanted to add, and I'll be quiet. But remember, in the 1800s, in the early 1900s, Irish American immigrants came here. Why? Because of famine in Ireland. This story has not changed. This is the reason I'm here, is because we would have died otherwise, I suppose. We waited long enough. And same reason that these really great students are here as well. It's from some kind of need. This has been happening since forever, actually. So I think to deny, it's the equivalent. Did you guys watch Titanic? Mm-hmm. All right. Remember the part when some of the boats were underfilled and some folks said, me first, I'm on the boat, but you can drown? It's kind of what we're asking people to do that are coming here in caravans, escaping gang violence, domestic violence, in my case, civil war in the 80s. So I guess I don't disagree with you, and that the problem are those countries and their governments. I agree. Part of the problem has been U.S. intervention as well. It doesn't mean the U.S. has to pay for it. What I am saying is that there has to be a vetted process to fix it, but fixing this is not, this takes more than one solution. It's not easy.
Yeah, because, like...
Let's give someone else a chance, okay? So I see some other hands over there.
By undocumented, does it simply mean that they don't have the documents to get in? Or is it also that they do have the documents, but they're turned away?
So I'll give my quick answer, and you guys know even better than me, more recently in your process, your stories. For my case, we actually did try to apply for political asylum, but because we were from Central America, we were denied. So my mom tried for a month. Remember, my mom did not want to leave El Salvador. I really want to stress this point. People think that people are coming over here and by the van loads, and they're dying to come here. We did not want to leave our family at all. So in our case, no visa, work visa, student visa, no political asylum whatsoever. And then once here, there's no documentation due to that fact that you can stay here legally. So that to me would encompass everything that's undocumented. So you guys want to add to it?
I just wanted to add, so as I had mentioned before, I came here when I was 3 years old. So obviously I was not fit to run or cross the border. So we did try and do things, just like anybody else. So my father was actually here already on a work visa. So he was here, he left when I was 3 months old. 3 years passed and he was still here because that's how we survived with the money he was sent back home. So then after those 3 years, my mom did try and apply for a visa. However, the common misconception and why people do cross the border is because she needed to show that she either had a college education, that she owned property, or that she had
a good amount of money to show that she would be back to her country and that they weren't just granting visas out of nowhere. So obviously if you are fleeing these countries and you are leaving, it's because you don't have these resources. If my mother had a college education, she might have been way better off and wouldn't have had to put us through what we had to go through to get here. However, she obviously didn't have those things. So the next thing we did after we were denied in Colombia, we traveled to the neighboring country, Venezuela, and we stayed there for 7 months because that's what we needed to do in order to then apply there for a visa. So we didn't just right off the bandwagon cross the border because I was 3, like I said. And after being there for 7 months, we were jumped while we were there. I remember vividly, it took me probably 5 years to get over the trauma of seeing police, because actually the police there are corrupt and they jumped us. So these are real things. And then after those 7 months when we did apply there, they told my mother that, I'm sorry, we can't do anything for you because the Twin Towers had just collapsed. So I was not able to come here. So imagine wasting that amount of money, that amount of time in order to come here the right way and to just go back to your country empty-handed. And that's when my mother was given the option of crossing. And I know that if I was in that position, I would have done the same thing. And my father wasn't agreeing to it. He was really upset because obviously I was 3 years old, but she knew that, imagine how hard things have to be in your home country that you know if you go back, you won't survive. You prefer to cross a border with a 3-year-old, than to go back to that country. That just shows you what we're coming from, what all of these people have to live with on the daily in order to come to this country. So that's just to kind of talk about the process. So there is a process and millions of people try it, but it's very limited.
I feel that when Manuela emphasizes the fact that she is a 3-year-old, I want to put the image out there that when you're crossing, you could get kidnapped, you could get raped, you could never even come to the United States. No one could ever know where you are. You are really putting your life at danger because you want a better future. You want a chance to survival. So you're going to take this path where you might potentially never end up in the United States because you want to. I don't think that that's very logical. I don't think anyone wants to put themselves into a death situation. I just think they're put there because they have to go through it. There's no other way out. If there was a way for people to get a visa to come over here and work when you were poor, I think that they would take it. If there was any other way to do this process legally, anyone with a heartbeat would take it. If I could change my status, if there was a path that I could take to change my status, I would do it. My parents have taken so much out of their time. My dad, it took him 14 years to just get an approval. He's been in courts, in and out, and paying money constantly, every year going to courts. We aren't just here living the life, undocumented, living the good life. We're not living a good life. We're living in the shadows. You can't get jobs if you don't have an employment permit. So we can't really take your jobs if you don't have an employment authorization card. So the last resort is cleaning houses, which I've done, my mother has done. A lot of us clean houses. I've cleaned so many toilets, I can't even count them. Do you clean toilets? I have an employment authorization card, and the only reason I have that is because of DACA. If I didn't have DACA, I would be undocumented as my mother. And I would only be able to work as a house cleaner, a babysitter, things that you don't really get paid much to do, but it's hard labor. So, yeah, just to put that out into image.
Really quickly, I just want to say one thing, and then to piggyback off of that, I think it's also important to look at this from the financial point of view. Upon entry into DACA, we had to pay approximately $1,000 to just apply to get this form, and every 2 years we have to renew it and pay $500 to the government. So if you do a head count of how much money that is, I know that there has been a recent they were kind of threatening to take this away. They're not going to take this away because they make way too much money
off of it, off of our lives and our hard work.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And also with that, 1 second. Although my parents are house cleaners, we all pay taxes. I even at the end of the year have to pay the government. Am I going to ever get any of that? Probably not, because there is no path to citizenship until this point. Go ahead.
I would like to say, like, just, you know, I don't think that the majority of, what's the proper would just undocumented immigrants, I don't believe that it's meant to be insensitive. I think in terms of just America specifically, they haven't even been able to give any type of reparations or help to people that they disenfranchised here themselves, whether it was slaves, whether it was Asian workers who they had working the railroads and having internment camps, whether it was Native Americans who are still in the country but not considered part of the country that are in reservations. So, and then just poor people, even if you're like white and poor, or black and poor, or anything in poor in the country. So because there's so much poverty domestically, it's kind of hard that, and people can't move up in the country that they were born in, it's hard to think that, basically they're poor, right? So let's just take poor people in America and just call them poor. Whatever number it is, 0 to 100, whatever it is. And then you take other people from other countries across the world who are being attacked and killed, whether it's for religious reasons, ethnic reasons. There are Indians in like Fiji who are being persecuted. So it's like, where's the line in terms of like all the people who are allowed to be, not just like saying you guys shouldn't be here, but it's just like everybody in general who's poor, we're all dealing with the same oppression in a way. I feel like, and that's kind of the misinterpretation. It's not trying to be insensitive to anybody who's undocumented. It's just, we feel like sometimes the situation is constantly being swayed one way or another, whether it's like, oh, we hate this, we hate that, or like, even like to kind of make an analogy like with the LGBT community, some black people are like, oh, how come they're like addressing LGBT, but they're not addressing us because we've been oppressed for hundreds of years just for being born this way rather than even being able to develop a sexuality. Like, I just feel like instead of addressing the situation as, maybe I'm just like I'm more critiquing the way that this conversation is, the dialogue is being unraveled. I feel like it's better to address it as in the fact that we're just all trying to get to a place of regulating. Because I saw like certain questions were obviously starting to affect you because, you know, you've obviously been through your things. I've been through my things. I'm not going to go into what I describe myself as, but you know, you could look at me and probably imagine I probably been through some things. So I just feel like, you know, instead of, and I'm not trying to say you're doing anything wrong. It's just, I feel like a national conversation, an international conversation should be more on like, and back to his question too, where he's like, oh, jobs, like he's probably still looking for a job. Like he's not looking for maybe not trying to stay at the hospital. He's probably trying to get something higher. Everybody's trying to raise their own thing. Even he mentioned earlier that I think over time, those people who are in those jobs don't stay in those jobs or something like that. Like,
yeah,
so it's like, where do they go? You know what I mean? You would hope that, and I would hope that you and your children would be improved, and I would hope that my children improve. Everybody's trying to get higher, but it just feels like there's a lot of poverty. So it's kind of like, where's the answer? Do you get the answer?
There's a very quick and kind of direct answer. I don't know how to go around this, but we are not the reason why anybody is poor. I know you're not trying to say that,
right.
But that's probably number one. And that's why we do this, because we're here to educate people, because the media shows you something different. So the media links being undocumented to being part of the gang. The media links to the fact that why people are poor in this country, citizens are poor in this country, is because we're taking their jobs. So all of these things are misconceptions, and I think that's number one, is breaking that, because we are not the reason why you're poor. Because trust me, my mother cleans houses for a living. That's literally all she can do. And she comes home sometimes crying because, she's 55 and she still has to do that. And I'm sorry I'm getting emotional, but like, these are real things. Like,
so, I'm sorry. To go to your point, I think you're right. The United States has a lot of reparations to make to its citizens and to all people living here, because immigration is just one part of all of these intersections and identities of the society that people have to live in. The United States needs to do better. And this is just me as someone who grew up in the United States. Even if I were a citizen, I would still be actively voicing and critiquing and advocating for Black issues, brown issues, LGBTQ issues, because they exist in this country. And immigration right now is just the focus of this panel. So I'm going to assume that that's why the dialogue that you're referring to is based on immigration. Right now, we're not talking about the reparations to other communities and other minorities simply because the panel for today is focused on Central America and the history behind those relations between the United States, Central America, and now the caravans that are coming in. But I completely agree, the United States needs to do better on all fronts. For its immigrants, for its citizens, for everybody. I don't know if that answers your question, but as far as the dialogue goes, the event today is specifically for undocumented immigrants in Central America.
And if I could quickly, nicely said, if I could add to that. So let's talk about data, right? So no emotionality from this perspective. So the first thing is to clarify what we mentioned before. So again, it's not real world data. This is what we call medicine real world data. When you actually look at it, how medication works in actual patients who are living their lives going to see a doctor every month. That's real world. Clinical trials to get the medication approved is more of a controlled process. So the data that's out there that I showed you, that's literature data. Real world data doesn't exist. No one's collecting it. They tried in 1991 for undocumented immigrants. They did it for 1 year, but there's no follow through. So, you know, what was that show? What are they doing now? So that's what I wanted. That's what we should be talking about with undocumented immigrants. What impact are they having? So one point of clarification for the literature, what it shows is that long term, meaning up to 5, 10, 15 years, there's no decrease in employment for Native Americans as an effect of undocumented immigrant population coming in any particular region.
When you say Native Americans, do you mean people who live there domestically, or do you mean Native?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So native born, I should say. Sorry. So native born Americans. So I'm glad you bring this up because this really emphasizes the need for educating people, including me. I didn't know about this data until I started looking into it. The other point about the working poor or the poor, all the points that you make, I don't disagree with you. So let's talk about that data again. Except for a few benefits you guys know better than me for DACA, right? So DACA is 800,000. By the way, 1,000 times 800,000 is so 800 million. So no, they're not going to take that program away.
Yeah.
So that's the income coming in, right? And I don't know where that gets allocated. But so in terms of the 11 million estimated undocumented immigrants, 800,000 are DACA, so about 1.1 million between DACA and temporary protected status, TPS. So 90%, okay? So DACA has some benefit that you may get, like you mentioned a card.
So with DACA, it's basically, it's a permit, so it allows us to apply for jobs, right. And it allows us to apply for a driver's license. So without DACA, I wouldn't be able to, I mean, I guess I could drive, I just don't have a license, which is like, you know, not everything.
So that's a protected benefit.
Right, so those are really the two major benefits that come with DACA is just, it's more or less a temporary documentation. Like I'm not a citizen, I don't get, so as a student, I don't receive any financial aid. So I'm about to graduate, so these past 4 years, year after year, $8,000 have been coming out of my pocket through whichever ways I could get them. Because we're not citizens, we don't receive those TAP or just federal or state aid at all. But we do get to go to school. And the benefit here in New York is that we're charged as in-state tuition, but undocumented students who are in other states like Georgia, they get charged out-of-state tuition, regardless of the fact that they grew up in Georgia or not. So there's small little things that just allow us to get, you know, through life. So it's in between. It could be better, but it's what we have.
Right. So to answer your question, based on the data we have now, so there's a need for more. So there's no data to show that undocumented immigrant population, in terms of what they take, will affect the poor that are native born. So actually, it's the exact opposite. So again, a guesstimate, it's probably on the low side. About 60% of undocumented immigrants file taxes. So the money that gets put into the system by undocumented immigrants is a net positive as opposed to what gets taken out. Why? It's simple. Undocumented immigrants don't have access to social benefits, so they put into a system that they can't take out from. So in terms of, imagine how that would impact the US economy. It wouldn't, right? So actually, they're putting money into the economy overall. So net positive, not a net negative. So that's why I like to have these conversations based on data, not just the stories. I think the combination makes it that much more effective. And again, we need to have more of these discussions, and I'm glad that you asked questions.
I just want to make one point on this too. If you look at the broad sweep of history, right? Whether you're an immigrant, undocumented or not, it's a legal question. In this country, over the course of our democracy, there's been lots of legal questions that have been challenged. Slavery was challenged. The woman's right to vote was challenged. These things were illegal. We stood up against them. We made a better democracy. We have a holiday for Martin Luther King because he broke laws that were immoral and changed those laws. The status of these undocumented immigrants and immigrants coming into this country, that can be changed. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a pie that if you get some, I don't get some. This is a tremendously wealthy country. What we should be questioning is how that wealth is distributed. Why do we have so much poverty? Not just among immigrants, but among just working-class people. And that's the conversation, that bigger conversation. We're just having this conversation as if it's just this little circle and you're going to take my piece. It's not about that. It's a piece that's growing, but we, the working people, whether they're immigrants or not, are not getting a fair share of it. And I feel like that's the big discussion. That's the context. And sometimes you got to work hard, and you got to struggle, and be brave, and fight for a better democracy that represents all of us. Our ancestors came here for the same reason that their ancestors are coming here. No different. They were fleeing tough times. They were fleeing persecution. There's no difference. It's the human condition. We just have to figure out how to make it fair. I would say that way.
And if I can just add something, I know you spoke about kind of leveling up in terms of jobs, etc. And I definitely respect the hustle of everybody who wants to progress in the United States. However, it's more difficult for undocumented immigrants to progress because they will always have the burden of their status. My grandmother was a chef. She was one of the best chefs. Aside from her being a woman, she was undocumented, and when she felt like she was progressing and she was doing better than everybody else, her boss easily just said, and sorry for using these derogatory terms, however, these are the realities we speak about. Woman should not be the head chef. You don't know English. You know what I mean? That's what she was being told. That's what she was being told. And hearing that now, it's just like, that's why are you kind of, why are you kind of deciding her fate based on her status and her nationality instead of her work ethic? So these things, I know you speak about leveling up, but it's very difficult for undocumented immigrants to kind of progress because she couldn't speak up about it. She was in fear of deportation. Of course everybody wants to progress in the United States, however, for an undocumented immigrant, you always have to keep in mind that at any given moment, no matter where ICE can potentially come and easily ruin your dreams, deport you back to your country where now you're in poverty, you can be exploited to sex trafficking or drug trafficking. So it's definitely difficult, and I see where you're coming from. Like I said, I respect the hustle. However, for undocumented immigrants, it's very difficult to kind of progress. And to give another example, my father, currently in the Dominican Republic, is a police officer, and as you can see in these countries, there's an immense corruption in these jobs. My father has seen the corruption in the Dominican Republic. However, he can't speak about that because if he tries to go on and speak about it, he would easily be killed because he's exploiting the realities of the corruption, which is why we kind of emphasize these reasons why undocumented immigrants seek asylum from these countries or just want to come to the United States, kind of continue on with their lives. So I definitely see everybody's point. However, I want everybody to see in the eyes of an undocumented immigrant. Sometimes these decisions are made like that. These decisions are not a process that are thought about. It's either one way or another. You're either back in the corner and you have to decide right away, and that's your fate. So like Priscilla was saying, you don't know whether you can be raped, murdered, etc. You just have to think, I'm trying to have a better life and I'm trying to make a better life for my children, my family. So these decisions are very rash, they're very quick to make, and the outcome isn't, you don't know what the outcome can be, which is what we want to emphasize. It's very difficult, and it's very sad that not only undocumented immigrants, but everybody goes through this. Everybody. There's a lot of like the LGBTQ community. I know they have been oppressed for the longest. Sometimes they are disrespected, and they still are disrespected, and it's sad how, as a society, we do not respect everybody as individuals. So, that's what I want to say.
Sorry, just to close it off, we're not taking away of any other groups that are activists. The end goal is human rights. We are all fighting for the same thing, and it's human rights. We're not taking away from Black movements. We're not taking away from LGBTQ. I'm not. I'll speak for myself. I'm pro Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. I'm LGBTQ. I will go out there and fight for you. I'm fighting for all human rights. But right now, I'm just speaking about the undocumented student rights.
I also wanted to add to that because I feel like, you know, as citizens, like we always have like this misconception because we're not educated, because we don't have to deal with it. But what I know for a fact is that, you know, like I said, meeting undocumented students and finding out that they don't receive financial aid was crazy to me, because it's like they really have to work twice as hard than I do. Like, I'm really privileged enough to just be able to fill out a FAFSA every year and I'll be okay. Like, I don't have to worry about how I'm going to pay for school. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to be here next semester. I don't have to worry about certain things that they have to worry about. You know, like if there's no food on the table and we are struggling, okay, I can apply for food stamps. And like, I did have food stamps at some point, but like I had that option, but where is that money coming from? Like that money is being taken from undocumented immigrants. Like it's going into all of these social welfare programs that I can actually benefit from. But they can't benefit from it. So it's like you're taking from them, but you're not giving them anything back. But like as a citizen, I can benefit from that. And that's messed up. Like that is the privilege. It's like, okay, we're all struggling, but like, wow, like I at least can vote. I at least can go, you know, fight at a protest, like without, you know, in fear of being deported. I can, you know, there are certain things that I can do. Like I said, financial aid, like that's one. There's a whole bunch of others. So yeah, sure, we all struggle, but like social issues do not compete with each other. One is not more important than the other. Conversations need to happen with each and every one, and we all need to figure out a way how to, you know, better each and every issue that we all go through. Like we're not here to compete against other social issues. Like they're all important. Conversations need to happen. What we're doing right now is having a conversation because it needs to be had. That's it. We're trying to make you aware, we're trying to educate you, we're trying to just, you know, fight against like the misconceptions and all the, you know, the wrong information that is being given to you by the media and elsewhere.
So I know you guys have like these couple of hands up here. I just want to make sure you got the chance. This is really a comment. I just wanted to say that I think it's important the fact that you guys are really like checking into this. Simply because like the only difference between you and me is just that I got a chance to do this the right way, and I got my citizenship. I immigrated too, you know. And I can imagine, like I was like tearing up when hearing your story, because I feel so like, in a sense, ungrateful that I never realized, oh, I don't have to go through that financial aid is what's allowing me to even go here, honestly. Without that, I can't even imagine. And also that the fact that you guys think that like apply for benefits is insane. And I interned with Senator Schumer, and I hear like Trump supporters, so they call like, oh, my son, he just died from heroin and then legal immigrant. It's just ridiculous, the fact that there's no correlation between the two. There is no correlation. I don't understand, like, who got your son the heroin, you know? And the fact is, like, this is the reality. The small percentage of criminals, there's criminals in every group. And for, like, my family,
For example, when my uncle tried to come, basically they denied her simply because of the fact that they just saw some threat of terrorism from a Facebook post that he shared. It's small things like that that he's denying it completely, and it sucks because they say they go to the Arab community, they're always targeted as terrorists, this and that. So the amount of people that are denied, and they live in like Afghanistan, Pakistan, or it's even worse than Egypt, it's even, I just can't imagine. So I just wanted to say, like, I think this is like...
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Maybe we can have time for one more question or comment, and then we should probably let you go to your next classes.
I just wanted to say that when I was asking my questions, like I wasn't trying to say it in like a malice or any kind of way. I'm just very passionate about when I talk and on something, so I don't want it to come across as I was trying to attack what you guys are doing or anything like that. I actually think you guys are all very well spoken, and I'm actually like kind of like, I want to say proud, but I don't really know you guys like that. You know, no, seriously, because it takes a real strong-minded set of people to do what you guys are doing right now. So that's pretty that's commendable. You know what I mean? So like I'm just very strong in the way I talk and stuff like that. So I know it probably came off as if I was trying to come at you guys or something like that, but I wasn't trying to come at you guys or anything. I was just speaking what was on my mind. So I just want to say.
Well, but thank you very much for saying that, because people think it, and that's what is going on in our communications breakdown in the country. And if you can't get those subjects that are under the table and put them on the table, you're not going to get anywhere. This week is dedicated to the topic of Central America in crisis. And so naturally emotions are going to come out. And we'd like to treat it 100% like data. And we can. We're going to show that as well. But also there's all these sides. And I'd like to encourage everyone here to come to as many as you can of the sessions that we have planned for today and tomorrow and for the rest of the week. Just to briefly go over, later today we'll have a talk on, today is actually Susan Meiselas and Mercedes Doretti, are you here right now? They will be showing documentation of the crisis in Central America, specifically Nicaragua right now. And you'll be able to see what some people are going through that maybe started this whole thing. And it might not be at your generation, it might be your parents. And then tomorrow, we actually will have Luis Argueta, who is a Guatemalan filmmaker, has been nominated for or his name was nominated for the Best Foreign Language Film for a film called El Silencio de Neto, about a homosexual man in a very brutal time of the Guatemalan dictatorship, 1954. But he's going to present his new film called U-Turn, which is sort of about the discontent and what happens to people who are here and we think, wow, they're, getting away with a lot, and in fact they're sometimes abused by the very employers who we think they should, we're keeping our prices down and all of this, so there's a shadow economics that's going on as well. And this is something that you don't realize. We're fighting to get a fair minimum wage so that your parents don't have to basically support you by letting you live in their house so you can afford your own rent. And yet there are masses of people who are allowed to work on a temporary visa. They come in, but they're not really getting minimum wage. They're getting, on paper, it looks like minimum wage. But in fact, they have all kinds of abuses, and they're very vulnerable to what the system is going to offer them. So they kind of have to work illegally, which means you've got an illegal guy hiring you. Keep that in mind as well when you think about what that other side is. And he's going to talk about people that went back and why they went back. We also have a wonderful presentation this afternoon, Photo Kids, about the trauma that Guatemalan and Central American children are experiencing and how this comes out psychologically in art and in every aspect of life. So I'm saying that just to say, please stay tuned. You'll see a list of classes. They're open classrooms. And so you'll see the flyers around, so please try to come to any if you can. And thank you so much to Dr. Mendoza, Mario Mendoza, and thank you so much to the panelists. Please. Well, muchas gracias.